Buck?
He's dead.
No, Ian, he isn't dead. Puppets don't die. He's just sleeping. Can you wake him up for me?
And now it's time for What's in the Bible with Ian.
What? Huh? I just had a terrible dream that someone was taking over the show. How's my hair? What's he doing here?
I've come to see the ponies.
What?
The ponies! Mr. Fisher said this show would have ponies.
Phil?
No, I didn't say we would have ponies on the show. I said we might mention ponies when we talk about creation.
You said we would have ponies and I could ride them. Ponies are God's most beautiful creatures, besides unicorns.
Did you say unicorns?
Did he say unicorns?
Oh, this one's going to be even bumpier than the first one. I'm putting on my seatbelt.
Our sofa doesn't have seat belts.
Oh, that was a metaphor.
Our sofa doesn't have metaphors.
We really need to start the show. Can I get back to you on the ponies, Ian?
All right, but I'd like a brown one with spots.
All right. Buck, take it away.
Theme music? Good day, world. This is Buck Denver, and I've got news for you. The Bible! What is it? Where did it come from? What do we do with it? How does it affect our lives? Once again, it's time for...
Big Questions with Buck Denver!
That's right. Big questions with, me. Today's question, who wrote the Bible?
Who wrote the Bible?
Yes, thank you. Well, what do you think?
Oh, let me think. Lots of people who love Jesus. All different people, and there was a lot of them, and they all wrote different books. Only one. I think it's 2 people. Nobody. You need a lot of writers to write all of those Bibles.
Some of the disciples wrote part of the books.
I don't know what they're called. Matthew, John, then Simon. Wait, no. Peter and Luke. Paul did, didn't he? Nehemiah. David. Moses. And they said that he wrote the law. Prophets, disciples, and apostles.
Those are the people who would listen to God and then write down what he's saying.
Well, God made the Bible, basically. They make copies of it.
Yep, God wrote the Bible. That's why we call it God's words.
You're sort of right and sort of not. We don't call the Bible God's words, we call it God's Word. And there's a difference.
Explain.
Sunday school lady?
I'll see if I can help. You see, Christians believe the Bible was inspired by God, not written by God. Pastor Paul, what does inspire mean?
The word inspire comes from a Latin word that means to breathe or blow into. It means God breathed into people the ideas or thoughts he wanted them to write about.
That's right. So God breathed these ideas into people who then wrote the different books of the Bible. God inspired them to write, and they chose the words. It's God's truth communicated through people's words.
Okay, so who were these people that God used to write the books of the Bible?
Well, since the Bible has affected so much of history, many people have debated for years and years who wrote each book. This is what most Christians believe. We believe Moses wrote the first 5 books. Jewish tradition says Ezra wrote 1st and 2nd Chronicles, Ezra and Nehemiah. We think David wrote some of the Psalms, and Solomon wrote many of the Proverbs, and most likely the Song of Songs. The major and minor prophets were written, we believe, by the men those books are named for. We think Jeremiah also may have written Lamentations. In the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John were written written by, well, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Luke also wrote the book of Acts, and John also wrote 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John, as well as Revelation. Jesus' brother James wrote James, and the disciple Peter wrote 1st and 2nd Peter. Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, Galatians, Ephesians, Philippians, Colossians, 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, 1st and 2nd Timothy, Titus, and Philemon are all letters written by Paul, who was very, very busy. Back to you, Buck.
Hey, wait, you skipped a few books.
Oh, the other books, well, we're not entirely sure who wrote those.
Well, how can we trust them if we don't know who wrote them?
Good question, Buck. You see, we don't trust the books of the Bible because we know exactly who wrote each one. We trust them because they're in the Bible. God not only inspired the authors who wrote these books, we also believe He inspired the process that picked which ones should be in the Bible and which ones shouldn't. Now, how did that process work and why do we think we can trust it? We'll talk about that in our next episode.
We're about to pull over for Slim Jims and Twizzlers, and I still haven't learned anything about Genesis.
Oh, you're right. Buck?
Genesis? Never heard of it. Ah, just kidding. Genesis, the first book of the Bible. What's it all about?
Yes, the first book of the Bible is Genesis. Let's hear a song about it.
And now, the fabulous Bentley Brothers.
Genesis begins it all, and appropriately it's at the beginning of the Bible. Genesis really means beginning. If it were anywhere else in the Bible, that would be kind of confusing. Can you make a light without a light switch, or water without a spigot? Can you make a man from a dustpan? Well, you can't, but guess what? God did it. Let there be light, there it was. Plus bugs and rhinoceroses. Adam and Eve had one rule to follow, but they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, causing trouble for all subsequent people. In Genesis begins it all, and appropriately it's at the beginning of the Bible. Genesis really means beginning. If it were anywhere else in the Bible, that would be kind of confusing. Can you make a man build a zoo? Oh, and make it so the whole thing floats. Well, God told Noah to build a big boat, and I'm sure you're aware of old Abraham and Sarah, Isaac and Rebecca, Jacob, Rachel, and their 12 sons. There's a ton more in there that we would really like to share, but we just can't make it clear in this song here. About Genesis begins it all, and appropriately it's at the beginning of the Bible. Genesis really means beginning. If it were anywhere else in the Bible, that would be kind of confusing. That would be kind of confusing. That would be kind of confusing. In the Bible.
Thanks, fellas. Nice hair. Let's dive right in. Genesis is a long book with 50 chapters that's divided into 2 parts. The first 11 chapters make up part 1, covering primeval history. Pastor Paul, what does that mean?
The word primeval comes from 2 Latin words meaning first and age. So primeval history is the story of the first age. It's the story of what happened first.
All great stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Now, the beginning of the story answers the who and the where. Who is our story about, and where does it take place? The beginning section usually ends with an event that changes the world for our characters, that turns their world upside down. For example, our story might be about a little fish and a daddy fish living in the bottom of the ocean. At the end of the beginning, a terrible event happens, and the little fish is captured and carried away. Does that story sound familiar? Now, the middle of a story is where the characters try to make things right, try to fix what was broken in the beginning.
And the end of the story is where they roll the credits so we can count all the stuntmen and best boys.
Actually, the credits come after the end of a story. The end of a story is when we find out if the characters' efforts worked, if they can make their world whole again, if the daddy fish can find his son and they can be together again.